Gabe Brown is one of my favorite people ever, and if you want to know about regenerative agriculture, ways that we're actually going to be able to improve local economies and honestly save the world, this podcast has a lot of very valuable information. So take the time to hear what my buddy Gabe has to say. Gabe, it's wonderful to see you again, my friend. I think this makes your third time on being on the Sowing Prosperity podcast. So definitely enjoy having you on. It's definitely a fan favorite as well. So you have been traveling like crazy. So what does that mean for Gabe Brown to be traveling like crazy here in the summer?
It's difficult. First of all, great to be with you again. One of my favorite podcasts to come on, and I really enjoy the chance to visit with you and your audience. Difficult for me to travel during the summer, of course, because I'd rather be on the ranch. But our son and his wife have that handled, so I've kind of taken a step back from the consulting end of things and from the speaking end. I don't do many speaking engagements anymore. I'm more focused on, I don't know what the right wording is. How do I make the greatest impact as far as change in the way both we're doing things from an agricultural production model standpoint, but even more importantly, how do we drive that change? And I believe it's through the consumers. So I'm spending a great deal of my time now interacting with brands and companies and organizations that really have the opportunity to help drive meaningful change. And so did a TED Talk in June. I was fortunate enough to be invited to New York City to do that, which was very interesting. The theme of that TED Talk, they invited about 20 of us in from all over the world. How do we feed 10 billion people with the constraints of climate change? And I found it interesting that there was only a couple of us who were representing what I consider production ag. There was a lot of interest in lab grown meats and food alternatives, I'll call it that. Some plant-based products, which can be good. Uh, Really interesting, though, to interact with others. And quite honestly, and I'll just say this because, Gabe, I'm going to say it like it is. Uh, Frankly, it scared me. It scared me as to the lack of understanding of how food becomes nutrient dense, of how soil microbiology interact with plants to bring plants those nutrients that the plants need and then are either transferred into the grain, fruit, vegetable, or pastured protein. And it really alarmed me a bit that people think they can replicate that in a lab. And you and I, of course, both know that we need healthy soils to make healthy plants and have those phytonutrient compounds in those plants that are so essential for our health. And that was kind of, I mean, I knew that was happening and I knew many thought that, but it was really alarming to me, as I said, the lack of understanding of how soil ecosystems function and how that nutrient cycle functions. In saying that, we are seeing a interest from food companies as to, okay, what does that mean from them, and what do they need to do to source? I think they're beginning to hear it from consumers. One thing COVID brought about was an increase in awareness. I mean, you certainly saw it, an increase in awareness of food, and where your food comes from and how it's grown and raised, which is a good thing. All consumers, all of us as consumers, need to be more aware of that. So that's trickling through to these brands and companies, food manufacturers, etc., and they're beginning to reach out to us, want to know more about it. So that's kind of how I've spent a lot of my time traveling around, interacting with them.
I think that is so pertinent to the conversation we need to have. So, do you think these brands are more interested in the potential of the marketing advantage of, say, what the new cool terms of regenerative agriculture, or are they sincerely looking at making contributions to what you and I know we have to do to take that next step?
Yeah, good question. And I think both. No doubt a large number of them are looking at it from a marketing perspective. I mean, they're driven by their bottom line, and they need to show a profit to their investors. And that profit is derived in a large part from, people resonating with their brand. And so we see that. But let me share with you one experience I had. Back in May, I was in the UK, and a company, a brand by the name of Wild Farmed, asked for a meeting with us. By us, I mean myself and several from the Regenerative staff were there. And Wild Farmed is doing a very good job of educating farmers to plant polycultures. They're planting, for example, wheat and fava beans, and then they're separating and they're using the wheat in their breads. And, anytime you can get a farmer diversifying and growing polycultures, that's a good thing for the soil, the ecosystem, and a good thing for nutrient density in those products. And so we had a very good visit with them at their corporate headquarters there in London. And they're looking at doing some work with Regenerative and with the Understanding Ag team. So that's exciting. They are coming in at it from the standpoint more of the health aspect, the nutrient density, the soil health, the ecological health. So that's just one example of a brand that is truly interested in it from a nutrient perspective, ecological perspective. Although, make no mistake about it, the farmer stories that are coming about from that are good also. So they're getting both sides of the coin, so to speak.
On that consumer awareness or education or desire side, are you seeing a lot more interest on the nutrition side or wellness component? Is it more of the environmental side? Where is the motivation coming from in regards to these choices consumers are making?
Yeah, another very good question. And a large part of it is from the nutrition side, the nutrient density, and wanting it to be grown and raised without all the chemical inputs, etc. Um, However, there are a certain fraction of society who they are concerned more so about environmental. I mean, we're all concerned about our health, so we should all be concerned about the nutrient density. But they're looking at it from the standpoint of we're seeing a lot of issues, nitrates, phosphates in water sheds, water supplies, uh, you know, uh, climate change due to carbon being released into the atmosphere, etc. So there are some in society who are looking at it from that standpoint. That's much more prevalent, though, on both the East and West Coast. And like when I traveled, I spent some time in the UK and in Ireland this summer, and they're much, much more aware of it from a climate change perspective over there. And you've had me on the show a couple times. You know that I look at climate change as a result of the degradation that we've seen to our ecosystems, and I think and firmly believe it is reversible if we would change our practices. And I just want to add, in no way, should farmers be blamed for all of that. I mean, industry, society, etc., certainly has to take the greatest share of the blame. However, as an industry, farmers and ranchers are responsible for part of that carbon being emitted into the atmosphere, and we need to take responsibility for that.
The nutrient density side, I think, is really important in that as society, I think we're tired of being sick. And I think these last few years, it is coming to a point that we know intuitively something's wrong. And I think that the blame, in my view, goes squarely towards the corporatization of the world, really, and goes back to what you said earlier on that bottom line. The bottom line driven and the influence over years and compounding and compounding, compounding. Alan Savory gave a talk on Jared Lumen, the Herd Quitters podcast, that is one of my favorite interviews of all time. We actually put it on the YouTube channel because Jared doesn't have that. And he goes into these wicked problems of institutions. And I think that how Alan's experience and way of articulating that is something we should all listen to. So the influence, Gabe, from, say, the pharmaceutical corporatization model right into agriculture is massive. And I think that the feedback loop of negative for money is something that we can only break through decentralized food using regenerative practices. So what are your thoughts in that? Because you're in between those worlds in the way that I see it, and you're working with a lot of these bigger corporations that are doing things that they're to make money, and hopefully it is for the right reasons, but also a lot of these farmers that we have an epidemic of suicides, we have an epidemic of chronic disease, we have all these things going on that seem almost at odds to me. So what's your perspective on that?
Yes, I certainly agree with what Alan Savory put forth, and he's correct. And I'll use this as an example. I'll never forget, this has been a number of years ago. I was speaking in front of a civic group, doctors, lawyers, accountants, etc., and did a banquet speech. And after I was done, they were asking me questions. And my presentation was on regen ag and the importance of it. And the doctor stood up afterwards and he says, "Gabe, but you have to remember, I make my living writing prescriptions." And I'll never forget how upset I was. And, me, I'm going to say it like I think it. And I said, "Yes, but did you not also take an oath?" Oh, he got mad at me. He got really upset. But I think that incident illustrates just what's wrong. We don't have a healthcare industry based on preventative medicine anymore. We've got a healthcare industry based solely on treatment, okay? And we have gotten away from using food as preventative medicine. And why and how we got away from that, there's a number of issues, but we can look right back to World War II and the food shortages, and we just need to produce food. And not realizing at the time, by just focusing on quantity of food, we forgot about the ecosystem. And we forgot how these plants, as I stated earlier, get their nutrients via biology, and soil is a biological medium. It's not a chemistry medium. And that to me started the real decline where we started thinking of food as preventative medicine. We've all heard stories about our grandparents, great grandparents, and they'd live into their 90s living on real butter, real lard, not having to worry about what we're seeing now. I have two young grandkids they're both in grade school, and the incidences of these allergies to nuts and wheat allergies and milk allergies, dairy allergies, it's ridiculous. And that can only come about because I really believe today, by and large, we don't eat food, we eat food like substances. It's processed, there's so many additives to it, and it's not being grown and raised in an unhealthy soil. And so, getting back to your question, they may seem antagonistic working with large industry and then talking about nutrient density of food. But I really think we have to start everywhere, and we have to realize, unfortunately, most farmers and ranchers are not marketing like you are at McGee Market. They're just not selling direct to consumers. They're selling to these large agro-industrial complexes. So, in order to make the broad scale change to our ecosystems, it has to start with every farm and ranch. And I want to work with every single farmer or rancher. I want every farmer and rancher, I should say, to go down the regenerative path. But I can't go meet with each one of them individually. So how is Gabe Brown going to make the greatest impact? How's Understanding Ag going to make the greatest impact? We'll meet and visit with everybody we can, but knowing that these larger supply chains have the ability to drive meaningful change throughout their supply chain, that's why I visit with them.
I love it. I love how you honed in on what can make the biggest impact for my time. I think that's just wisdom, my friend. That's wisdom on how to make things happen.
Well, it just
Where
shows I'm getting old.
where are you seeing the focus on more of plant-based versus animal as far as products that these brands are interested in? Is it a lot more on quote unquote commodity style products, or are we seeing some emphasis on pork, beef, chicken, etc.?
Uh, Both. It is easier to hone in on the animal based because of we can use livestock as a tool to regenerate landscapes. And in so doing, they not only regenerate those landscapes, we improve the nutrient density of their flesh or milk or products from them while they're so doing it. So that's a bit easier to do. Also, we have to mention, I think, the importance of understanding the fact that, for instance, that grass finished steak that I'm going to have for supper tonight, that animal probably consumed 50 to 100 different plants the last week of its life. That's a tremendous amount of phytonutrient compounds that it had access to. Whereas a plant-based, it's simply one or two plants going into that plant-based product. So a little bit easier to talk that health aspect with the livestock-based products. In saying that, we're seeing a lot of interest from individual brands. For instance, sunflower company, a buckwheat company that makes flour, maybe an almond company that's making products from almonds. Those small to mid-sized companies have the ability to really demand change of their suppliers faster. So it's easier for them to get on board, which is a great thing. You got to start somewhere. And you know me well enough to know I am 100% behind sourcing as local as possible, buying local, support your local community. So anytime I can help support these smaller brands that can really benefit local economies, I'm all for that.
Well, to bring back a example, the Ralstons, who have recently gotten Regenerative certified, they think the absolute world of you. And so, can you go through, maybe not specifically them, but almost like a case study of how a medium sized business in this grand scheme is going to have a impact on not only Atkins, which is my hometown, right where they are located. What is Regenerative practices going to do for, say, Atkins and then the consumer as a whole as it gets distributed?
Yeah, and a great point and case study is when they reached out to Regenerative, realized, and I think they said it best in that they thought they were regenerative. Most farmers, ranchers think that they're regenerative, but you don't know what you don't know. And, you know, Gabe Brown and Regenerative and our teams, we're not God. We can't dictate are you or aren't you. However, we can measure and quantify change based on time tested ecological principles. So when Tim and Robin Ralston, when they came to Regenerative asking to be verified, the first thing is you have to make the commitment and want to truly know and understand, okay, is my farm or ranch regenerative or not? And so it's a suite of approximately 65 tests and observations that the verifiers do. And they went to the Ralstons and performed that verification process. And when you make the commitment and sign up and have the verification done, you can be in any of 5 tiers. Well, tier 1 simply means you applied, but until you hit a certain level, you cannot use the Regenerative seal or logo, and you cannot make the claim that you're regenerative. And I think it's important for your audience to understand that Regenerative, to as of today, is the only USDA FSIS approved regenerative label in the United States. They're the only ones that can make that claim on a label. And so the Ralstons came, suite of tests were and observations were performed. They didn't make tier 2, okay? They only made tier 1, which I know was disappointing to them. But to their credit, they said, okay, what do we need to do? What do we need to do to move into these higher tiers? So they put a plan together, and Understanding Ag helped them a bit with that plan. Here's what you need to do. You need to move to no-till, even though they're rice, and many say you can't grow rice no-till, which is totally false, and they're proving otherwise. They started growing cover crops. They're starting to integrate livestock. So think of what that means for the local community all of a sudden. They're starting to source cover crop seed locally, equipment. They had to purchase some no-till equipment. Okay, they purchase some livestock. You know, they need to fence their land for livestock. That's all money spent in the local community. They also hired additional help in the local community to help guide them, move them down this path. That's all dollars being spent right there locally. Now, to their credit, they were so focused and so committed to moving down the regenerative path. Year number 2, they jumped all the way to tier 3, which is fantastic. Hats off to them. They're doing a great job. I had the opportunity to be down on their farm in May and see what they're doing. And they're just doing a great job. So now you look at the compounding positive effects from that. All the benefits to the local community, plus then think of the benefits to all those who are consuming their products. Their products are now, we're doing nutrient density testing on their products, and it's much higher in these phytonutrient compounds. So every person that buys a product from Ralston Farms is positively benefiting their health. So the ramifications are just in multiples thanks to their commitment.
And that is a perfect story of how that decentralized aspect works too. What they're doing, and is that not the most beautiful rice farm setting? You've got Petty G Mountain in the background right there on the river. It's gorgeous out there. But th- that decentralized aspect is so important for production in my estimations. And to go back to the environmental side, the runoff from their fields is as pristine of water going back into the Arkansas River as I think you can. So you've almost got this massive filtration system in that farm in itself. And so uh, this may sound like a commercial for Ralston, but they are dear friends of mine, and it's the only rice that we eat. And the fact that they are so focused and execute on the plans, that's just how they are. You could tell that just by the farm. They execute and they bring it to life. So, are they somebody that you're able to use as an example across the world as to what can be done?
Absolutely. Um, you're right. It's so picturesque there at Pristine, and I had never been in that River Valley in that particular area before I was there this spring, and I was just blown away. But I was really even more so blown away by the people and their commitment not only to regenerative agriculture, but their commitment to their community. And I think that's important to say. They're providing jobs, and I had the opportunity to talk to several of their employees who were just really, really complimentary to the Ralstons as employers and also committed to the brand. And you brought up another very interesting point, the water leaving that farm and going back in that watershed. Think of the positive ramifications downstream. I always use the Mississippi as a baseline, and the fact that the last 100 miles before the Mississippi dumps into the Gulf of Mexico is known as Cancer Alley, highest cancer rates in the United States, unfortunately. And you compare that to what the Ralstons are doing and their commitment to cutting back on all these inputs and truly producing a product that is much healthier, all while doing what's right for the ecosystem. That's the type of mentality we need all across the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. All right. I want to take a little bit of a shift because I don't know if you're familiar with Texas Slim and the Beef Initiative, but something that Slim was talking about recently are these ear tags, these radio tags in cattle. Do you have any thoughts on that? Because the way he laid it out, honestly, Gabe, it's pretty terrifying. And so I think the cattle aspect or the ruminant aspect is so key to everything that we're talking about. I think that's how God designed nature to take care of itself, is the utilization of ruminants in herds. But these ear tags, is that something that you think is not a big deal, maybe a big deal? And is there anything that we as consumers need to do?
I would need to know a little bit more context what he said there because I'm not familiar with the interview that you're talking about and what he put forth.
Sure. Okay. The the context basically goes back to what I was talking about with the corporatization and the basically corporate capture of entities, and then the ability to track all basically movement of cattle. All right. And the movement is going to dictate potentially on what can be processed, what can be certified USDA. Therefore, that goes downstream to what can be retail sold, and just it's a whole aspect of control. So
Mhm.
maybe instead of just the ear tag focus, what thoughts do you have on the, well, my words, over regulation of agriculture?
Okay. Yeah, and I thought that's where you were going with that. You know, the RFID ear tags, obviously, they take place in Canada, are used extensively there. Uh, I think it is good for consumers to know where their food comes from. Where the issue in my mind lies is that we today have government, lawmakers, and those who serve beneath them in agencies, etc., making decisions which can either have positive or negative ramifications to farmers and ranchers. And they may or may not, and unfortunately, it's often they do not have the proper training. And you look at it like I'll use avian influenza and show me any large pastured poultry operation that's really doing a good job with birds out on pasture that have been negatively affected by that. No, it's confinement animals. It's birds in confinement because they're in a quote unquote more sterilized environment, which actually has negative ramifications on their gut, their immune systems, their susceptibility to these pathogens. And so the problem I see is that farmers and ranchers are going to be regulated by agencies that do not understand science. I mentioned earlier in this broadcast here how concerned I am that many do not understand how soil ecosystems functions, how the nutrient cycle functions. Well, they certainly then don't understand health of animals. You know, our animals, with the exception of our laying hens, are outdoors all year round. Now, the laying hens are outdoors the majority of the year, but we do have them in a hoop house during the dead of winter. But those animals are healthy. You know, they have a healthy life compared to an animal in confinement. Yet, if you would ask agencies, they're going to think just the opposite. And
Right.
they're going to quote studies that were not properly done, that were not done on regenerative farms and ranches. And I think that's part of the problem, the big problem. I am in no way a proponent of regulation. I do not think we should be dictated as to what to do. I think that comes down to trust between us and our consumer customers. If our customers find out and do not like what we're doing on Brown's Ranch, we'll be out of business in a heartbeat, you know? But that's one of the reasons we have an open door policy. Let them come and see what we're doing. I have nothing to hide. Yet you go to one of these confinement operations and try and gain access. Okay? You know?
You just made a whole nother argument, a whole nother angle for localized food. So go
Exactly.
into a little bit of what y'all do, Gabe, because I think that you have a model that's incredible, and I think that you do a lot of things people don't realize. So I know you're relatively close to Bismarck, so you've got a population base that you have for customers. But go into a little bit of just your model, kind of
Mm-hmm.
broad overview of how your ranch operates economically.
Yes, and as I said, our ranch now it's about 6,000 acres of owned and leased land. We're actually in the city of Bismarck jurisdiction now. Bismarck Mandan here is about 125,000 people. On those 6,000 acres, my son and his wife, uh, they run a cow calf herd. They grass finish several hundred head of beef animals per year. They have a smaller flock of sheep, and then they did at one time they were running much more sheep, many more sheep, I should say, but because of labor is extremely hard to come by in North Dakota. It's with the oil field, and if you're out of work in North Dakota, you just don't want to work because labor's in extreme short supply here in North Dakota. Paul, my son, put his flock of ewes out with two other producers. He then brings in the lambs at weaning, and he grass finishes them on our ranch. He runs pastured pork. Realize there's not a lot of sows in North Dakota, so he's farrow to finish and all outdoors. They farrow twice a year, April and late September, early October, outdoors, and then pastures the hogs, killing anywhere from 300 to 400 head approximately per year. Has broiler chickens. The broilers, though, are grown and raised actually in Missouri because we do not have a poultry processing facility in North or South Dakota. And by law, of course, you need USDA inspected in order to sell. So he contracts with a regenerative farmer there, young couple who has their own USDA facility, and they're raising about 8,000 broilers a year for him. We have approximately 1,600 laying hens that are on pasture on our ranch, so selling eggs from 1,600 layers. And then he has an agreement with a local apiary to bring bees onto our ranch. So Paul has the first right to buy back all the honey that is produced in the hives that are placed on our ranch. So has a great agreement with that apiary. They will Paul supply the bottles, and then they'll bottle the honey from the hives on our ranch, and he sells that. So besides that, we grow all the crops that our hogs and poultry eat. We grow a polyculture cash crop combination of wheat, oats, flax, and barley. And oats, barley, peas, and flax. And he combines that together. That goes into the hog and poultry rations. He also grows seed, rye, winter triticale, hairy vetch, forage winter wheat, sells seed also, and direct markets everything that is grown and raised on our ranch. Does not sell through the commodity markets. So,
I
yeah.
love it. See, I think it's so important to emphasize that you're not out there academically speaking and coaching. Like y'all live it, and you have been for a long time. I think that experience is crucial.
Yeah, and one of the things I think important for people to understand, I often hear, "Well, Gabe, it's easier for you to do because you're out consulting and you got all that other income." Well, I wasn't out consulting or anything until we turned the ranch over to our son, and I think it's important for me to tell the story that when our son went off to go to college. He didn't want to. He wanted to just stay home and ranch, but I forced him to go. And I promised him this. I said, the ranch will be yours. You come back after college. And when you're 30 years old, my wife and I'll turn the ranch over to you. And we kept that promise. He's had management of the ranch. He's 37 now, since he was 30. And that's when I started understanding ag, Soil Health Academy, and now Regenified. And Paul has grown Nourished by Nature, him and his wife Jasmine, to where it is today. And so it's separate businesses, and I look today at and work with so many. We work with, I'd have to count up how many clients we have. We just topped 35 million acres now we're consulting on. So a lot of clients, well over 1,250. And there's so many families that don't plan ahead for that transition. And I tell all of them, and our consultants tell them, a farm and ranch is not truly regenerative until it's moved to the next generation, whether that's a family member or not. Okay, it doesn't have to be a family member. But if we want to talk about true regeneration, we have to start within the family and community also. So I think that's important to bring up.
I think that's a beautiful point, an absolutely beautiful point. All right, as we wrap up, one more aspect I want your opinion on, your thoughts are processing. So animal processing, ruminant processing. Do y'all have your own micro processor, for lack of a better term? And if so, for most areas, is that important? Is that something that you really need? Because when I asked Will Harris that, he's like, I hope nobody has to have it. He said, but it was sure key for me. So what are your thoughts on the processing, the micro versus regional facilities?
Yeah, and this is a question I get all the time, and it is an important one, and it is one that, again, I think COVID really showed us some of the weak links in the food chain and in processing and distribution in particular. So back in 2012, we saw the need here in North Dakota for more processors. So our family invested in a very small processing facility, can only do 5 head a day. Okay. Once Paul started Nourished by Nature, it quickly became apparent that that little facility, which we were just but one owner of many, was not going to keep up. And in order to really focus and be able to get the quality of packaging, cuts, etc., that we needed, it became very quickly apparent to us that we needed to find a processor that could harvest a semi-load of animals a day. So for the past probably 7 years now, we've actually been shipping our beef animals down to Nebraska, Omaha, Nebraska, to be harvested. And then they're cut into primals. Then they're shipped to a fabricator in Northeast Missouri. And then that product, once it's fabricated, is frozen and then shipped back to our ranch where it's stored. We have enough on-farm freezer space to handle that amount. And believe it or not, and realize from a carbon use standpoint, et cetera, of course I'd rather have it done locally. Of course I'd rather be supporting jobs in our community. But I'm in North Dakota. How are you going to grass finish animals year round in North Dakota in order to keep a processing plant that can do a semi-load of animals a day in business? Okay, not going to happen very easily, right? So we can ship animals from Bismarck to Omaha, Omaha to Northeast Missouri, back to Bismarck, North Dakota at a lower price point than I can do it in our own facility, which is only 100 miles away. You know, it's economies of scale. So what I tell people is it's an excuse if you think you can't do it. We're located about as far away from any facilities in the U.S. as you can get, and we're making it work. So it can be done. Now, is it optimum? No. You know, I can see why Will, where he's at, and Will's unfair advantage, quite frankly, is the labor force there. You know, he's the largest employer in that county. So it's absolutely great. And I give Will and his family credit for what they're doing in that economy. You know, Will and I are good friends, been there many, many times. He's only been to North Dakota once. Will's a candy, and he can't put up with the weather up here, but that's another whole story. But anyway, I love what he's doing. I wish we could do it here in North Dakota. I'm not saying we can't, but there would have to be a lot more people finishing animals up here before we could make that that work.
Makes perfect sense. The geography matters a whole lot too. So, anything new or exciting coming up? We know you're focused on, that consumer side and working with brands, but is there any special events y'all are doing or something we need to know about?
Well, I would like your audience to uh, at least be aware of what I feel, and this is Gabe Brown's opinion and the opinion of some others also. But there's a tidal wave coming. In May, I was asked to go over to the UK and to keynote a conference from the largest grocery chain in the UK named Waitrose. They made the announcement at that conference that they were committing 100% to regenerative, and that by the year 2035, 100% of their fresh products, fruit, vegetables, meat, everything, would need to be regeneratively grown and raised. Okay? They have 352 grocery stores. That's a big commitment. Okay? That actually sent shockwaves through the industry. And, Whole Foods here in the US made a major commitment to regeneratively grown and raised food. We are seeing that now, getting interest from other grocers, supply chains that want to move down this path. So for all the farmers and ranchers in your audience, are you going to be ahead of the 8 ball or behind it? Okay. Why would you not start preparing, moving down this path? It's to your benefit because those who are in it and doing it are going to receive a premium. But also, I just want to tell you, you don't need that premium. There's some really good work by Dr. Jonathan Lundgren at the Igdices Foundation that shows that farms and ranches that use these regenerative practices have a 78% greater profitability. 78%. Okay? Why wouldn't you want to move down that path? And for the consumers out there, you hold the whole key, you consumers, because with your buying dollar, you can dictate and demand this change. Every time you walk into a grocery store, you should be asking that meat counter, that produce counter, is this regeneratively grown and raised? And I would say even more important than that is source local. Go to your farmer's market, go to McGeehan Market and, purchase your products locally. That's the best thing you can do for your health, and it's the best thing you can do for society as well.
Amen. Amen. I still think I've said it before. Our farmers and ranchers are frontline soldiers for getting this work done. I think it's unbelievably important, and I can't thank you enough, my friend, for taking the time to jump back on here and the work you've been doing for a long time. So thank you, Gabe.
It's a great pleasure to be with you. Take care.
Thank you for joining us in the Sowing Prosperity mission. If you like this content, like and subscribe, share with your friends. Be sure to check out sowingprosperity.com. Sign up for the email. We've got so much more work to do.